The crowd was overjoyed, and when they looked at Bai Shaochun, they already liked him to the extreme, thinking that not only was this Bai Shaochun cute, but he also had a lot of bad water in his stomach. So Shan Dafan made the decision to reward Bai Shaochun with a grain of spirit rice, which he stuffed in his hands. Bai Shaochun smiled happily and returned to his room in a daze. And before he could climb into bed, the oil of the countless genius earth treasures that had accumulated in his body exploded out. And with a dizzying feeling in his head, he collapsed directly onto the floor and fell into a fitful sleep. The sleep was sweet and extraordinary. And the next morning, Bai Shaochun opened his eyes, refreshed, and when he looked down, he realized that he had gained a bunch of weight, and that his entire body was slimy and plastered with a layer of black dirt. So he hurried out to clean up a bit, and Shan Dafat and the others, who were busy with the Door's disciples' breakfast, laughed when they saw Bai Shaochun's appearance. Nine senior brother, that dirt is impurities in your body. After it's removed, you'll have a much smoother time cultivating. You don't need to help out these days. You'll be working in a few days. That spirit rice is good stuff. Remember to eat it quickly. It's not good if you leave it for too long. Bai Shaochun was refreshed, and after nodding in response, he returned to his room and gazed at the turtle-shaped pot. So he carried it out to scrub it, brought it back to his room and put it on the stove, and held the grain of spirit rice in his hand to look at it, which was the size of a small thumb, crystalline and smooth, and radiated a gust of aroma. Everything an immortal eats is really extraordinary. Bai Shaochun sighed with emotion and set a few pieces of wood inside the fire stove on fire. And as soon as it burned, a scorching heat immediately hit his face, causing Bai Shaochun to focus on his eyes and hurriedly back away, looking at the fire inside the fire stove and TSK in wonder. This fire isn't ordinary either. Not only does it burn quickly, it's also much hotter than the fire in the village. Bai Shaochun took another look at the wood within the fire stove and thought that it should be that this wood was not bad. Just then, as the flames ignited, Bai Shaochun was surprised to see that the first stripe on the tortoise-shaped pot actually started to brighten from the bottom up. And soon this one stripe, from end to end, was all lit up. Bai Shaochun froze for a moment, then suddenly slapped his thigh. I told you so. This is a treasure. It must be better than eldest brother's pot. Bai Shaochun felt more and more that this pot was extraordinary, and hurriedly threw the spirit rice in the pot. Sitting on the sidelines while he waited, he picked up the bamboo book of the purple key harnessing tripod technique and began to cultivate according to the movements and breathing in the first picture inside. Almost as soon as he practiced, Bai Shaochun's eyes widened as he realized that this pose, which had been so difficult yesterday, was actually extremely smooth at the moment, without the slightest sense of difficulty, and even that method of breathing no longer appeared to be suffocating, but instead had a very comfortable feeling, especially the time to persist. He clearly remembered that before it was at most 3 or 4 breaths, but right now 7 or 8 breaths had passed, and there wasn't even the slightest bit of soreness. Enduring the exhilaration, Bai Shaochun calmed himself down until he was able to hold out for 30 breaths, and when he felt a faint soreness in his body, suddenly, a wisp of gas appeared from within his body, which was ice cold and traveled around his body at a rapid pace. And although it didn't complete a full circle before dissipating, it still made Bai Shaochun jump up and down with excitement. There's gas! Haha. There's gas! Bai Shaochun was ecstatic as he walked around the house. And it also occurred to him that it must have been because of all the heavenly materials he had eaten last night, and that his heart felt that he had eaten less. No wonder senior brother Shan said that he'd rather starve to death at the fireplace than go to the outer sect to compete. Such a good thing wouldn't even happen to an outer sect disciple. Bai Shaochun hurriedly sat down and cultivated again. This time, he followed the breathing method of the first layer of the purple key harnessing tripod technique with the movements of the first diagram, and persevered for a full 60 breaths. And the moment he reached 60 breaths, a vein of qi in his body that was twice as big as it had been before suddenly sprouted up, and like a trickle of water, it traveled rapidly through his body. With experience under his belt, Bai Shaochun hurriedly followed the markings on the first diagram, silently thinking of the several roots within his body. Soon, the qi vein trickle within his body was following the roots Bai Shaochun had thought of. And as Bai Shaochen still insisted on posing for the first diagram, he even detected a trace of qi drilling out of his body from all over his body, like water droplets, and integrating into that qi vein trickle, making it grow larger and larger. In the end, it turned into something like a small stream, until after a complete swim, Bai Shaochen's entire body shook, and a roaring sound came from his mind as if he had lifted a cloud. An unprecedented feeling of lightness immediately surfaced on his body, and clumps of dirt continued to secrete out along his sweat pores. The small stream within his body didn't dissipate as it had in the past, but was always there, slowly swimming all over his body on its own. And Bai Shaochen opened his eyes, which were even clearer, with a lot more spirituality in them. Even his body all felt noticeably lighter and faster. The qi veins always being there is a sign that this purple qi harnessing tripod technique had been cultivated to the first level. It also represents reaching the first level of that whatever qi condensation. Bai Shaochen couldn't help but be overjoyed, and ran out to clean up some more. When Shang Dafat and the others saw this, they revealed a smile that they understood each other, and although they were surprised that Bai Shaochen had cultivated the first layer so quickly, they understood the reason. Returning to the house, Bai Shaochen took a few deep breaths before picking up the bamboo book to the side and looking at it carefully. This purple qi harnessing tripod technique, after the first layer is completed, will be able to harness a number of objects. It's an immortal spell. It can take in objects across the sky, with light in his eyes. Bai Shaochen followed the method above. Pinch out simple seal with both hands, and pointed toward the table next to him. And immediately he felt the stream within his body, like a wild horse out of control, go straight to his right index finger, and even more so, detach itself from the tip of his finger. It was as if it had formed an invisible thread that connected to the table. But unfortunately, as soon as it did, the thread immediately became unstable and shattered with a snap. Bai Shaochen's face paled slightly, and it took a long time for him to recover. And after careful thought, he gave up on the table and instead took out the wooden sword from his pocket, which was made of an unknown wood and weighed not as much as the table, but was also a bit heavy, and he raised his right hand with a finger. The wooden sword shook and slowly floated up, but after only an inch, it fell back down. Bai Shaochen wasn't discouraged, and excitedly tried multiple times, and the wooden sword went from rising an inch in height at the beginning and then falling to 10 inches, 20 inches, and 30 inches. By dusk, the wooden sword in his room was able to float away in a straight line, and although it wasn't fast and it was difficult to turn around, it wouldn't fall as easily as it had in the earliest stage. From now on high, Bai Shaochen, I'm an immortal. Bai Shaochen stood there with a haughty look on his face, his left hand behind his back and his right hand raised and waved forward as the wooden sword wobbled and flew around. It wasn't until the breath in his body became unstable that Bai Shaochen retrieved the wooden sword, and was about to continue practicing when he suddenly smelled a burst of aroma coming from a pot on the side. He looked up and took a deep breath, and immediately worked up a big appetite. He had been so busy practicing this day that he had forgotten that there was still spirit rice cooking in the pot, and went up to open the lid of the pot. The moment he opened the lid, a rich aroma spread out from the spiritual rice inside the pot. Only on that spiritual rice, for some reason, a piercing silver pattern appeared. The silver stripe was so obvious that, upon closer inspection, it even had the feeling of taking in people's hearts and minds. But as time passed, it gradually became a dark silver color, and Bai Shaochen narrowed his eyes and, after thinking about it, took the grain of spirit rice out and held it in his hands to check it out. This pattern is somewhat familiar, Bai Shaochen's eyes revealed in thought, and he looked down at the fire stove, realizing that the fire inside had long since gone out, and even the wood had become ash, and that one of the bright patterns on the pot had dimmed back down. He immediately recognized that the silver stripe on the spiritual rice was, in fact, identical to the stripe on the back of the pot. Suppressing the doubts in his heart and playing it safe, Bai Shaochen didn't eat this rice, but placed it in his cloth bag, and after pondering for a moment, he walked out of the house to work with Shan Dafat and the others. Time passed, and half a month passed, during which Bai Shaochen's cultivation came to a standstill again, and his refinement was slow. But he had also found out that when other people cooked spirit rice, no silver streak would appear. Curious, he felt more and more that something was wrong with his grain of rice, and especially with the pot, which he found even more odd. And finally, a few days later, as Hai Sanfan went out to the fire stove room to purchase what he needed, he made a trip to the Four Seas room, where he poked around and found out that the handyman could go to know about cultivation in general. Upon returning from the Four Seas room, Bai Shaochun's heart beat intensely, and he held back his surprise until he returned to his room, where he immediately took out the grain of spirit rice, looking carefully at the silver pattern on it, his eyes slowly revealing a look of incredulity. In mortal cultivation, there are three indispensable refinements, which are medicine refining, weapon refining, and spirit refining. Bai Shaochun thought about the pictures describing spirit refining in the canonical books he had viewed in the Four Seas room, and comparing them to the silver pattern on the spirit rice. The more he looked at them, the more similar they became. Spirit refining. After a long while, he let out a long breath. Spirit refining is a special method for items forcefully injected into the power of heaven and earth means as a substitute for the Tao of heaven to exercise the law of creation, plundering the power of heaven and earth to strengthen. Whether it is a potion or magic treasure, can be refining the spirit of heaven and earth is not permitted. So there is a certain chance, once successful, can make the item power greatly increase, and if it fails, it will make the item directly under the power of heaven and earth to become a waste product. In refining the spirit of the most amazing, it can be stat refining, and even if you can successfully refine the spirit of 10 times, you can let the items appear heaven and earth changes. And the more precious things, stack refining spirit after the more horrible. Only the more to the back, the smaller the chance of success. Even some spirit refining masters do not dare to easily try. After all, once the cost of failure, difficult to bear. The canonical text once said that the protector treasure of my spirit stream set was a heavenly horn sword that had been spirit refined 10 times by great chance. Feeling a bit thirsty, Bai Shaochun swallowed a mouthful of saliva, his eyes already showing horror and even more confusion. In subconsciously glancing at the dozens of dull lines on the turtle pattern cauldron, his heart beating as if it were about to pop out of his chest. He was certain at this moment that the reason for the spirit rice's appearance of the spirit refining patterns, the reason for everything, was this pot. After some hesitation, Bai Shaochun gritted his teeth. If he didn't solve such a mystery, he wouldn't be able to sleep. But he also knew that if this pot was really not bad, then this hidden secret must not be made known to a second person. So he waited until late at night, and then carefully came to the pot, took a deep breath, and then took out the wooden sword that he had been manipulating, and threw it into the pot as he had thrown down the spiritual rice that day.